In the golden glow of chandeliers at my only son's wedding reception in a lavish Chicago ballroom, Nelson raised his glass and declared to 300 guests, "Your last name embarrasses me, Dad. I've hated being a Zaha my whole life." The room froze. I just smiled, nodded politely, and signaled the AV team. When the lights dimmed and the screen lit up, everything changed. Welcome back to your ultimate destination for gripping revenge stories, family betrayals, shocking betrayals, and emotional justice. Subscribe now and join a community and tell us where you're watching from. Turn on the notification bell for our next story. Are you ready to witness the ultimate payback? Let's get started. I am Mr. Zaha, and I'm 68 years old man. I built everything with these hands. Born in a small village outside Lagos before my parents brought me to America as a boy in the late 1960s, I arrived in Chicago speaking broken English and carrying dreams heavier than the single suitcase we owned. Zaha, my father's name, meaning radiance or brilliance in the old tongue, became both shield and burden. People mispronounced it, mocked it, asked if it was exotic. In high school hallways, it marked me as different. But I wore it like armor. By 25, I'd started Zaha construction from a basement apartment in Inglewood. Brick by brick, bid by bid, late nights poring over blueprints while my wife, Grace, God rest her soul, brought me coffee and reminded me why I fought. She passed too young, breast cancer at 42, leaving me with our son, Nelson, just 12 years old. I swore then I'd give him everything I never had: stability, education, a name people respected instead of questioned that I worked harder. Zaha Construction grew into Zaha Enterprises, commercial builds across the Midwest, luxury condos along Lake Michigan, a portfolio worth north of $180 million by the time Nelson turned 30. The name Zaha appeared on steel plaques outside gleaming towers, on charity galas, on the side of delivery trucks rumbling through the city. I made sure every employee knew. This name meant integrity, grit, excellence. It meant we'd risen from nothing. Nelson was brilliant, top of his class at Northwestern, MBA from Kellogg, charming smile that closed deals before contracts were signed. I was proud, but pride blinded me to the cracks. He winced when people stumbled over Zaha at networking events. He started introducing himself as Nelson Z in emails. When he met Cristobal, a poised marketing executive from an old money Winnetka family, he began spending weekends at her parents' lake house instead of ours in Hyde Park. That I told myself it was youth, independence. But the distance grew. Calls became texts. Visits became holidays only. When Grace's anniversary came each year, he'd send flowers to her grave but skip the quiet dinner I still held at home. Then came the engagement. Cristobal's family hosted an announcement party in their Gold Coast penthouse. Crystal flutes, string quartet, photos of their summer home in Door County. Nelson beamed beside her, but when someone asked about our family traditions, he laughed lightly and said, "We're keeping it modern, no old country stuff." I stood in the corner holding a glass I never sipped, feeling the name Zaha shrink inside my chest. Wedding planning accelerated. Cristobal wanted elegant, timeless, American. Venue, the Peninsula Chicago Ballroom. Flowers flown in from Holland. Guest list heavy with her parents' connections, bankers, philanthropists, politicians. My side, a handful of loyal foremen who'd worked for me since the early days, a few cousins from Atlanta, and old friends from the mosque on 79th Street where Grace and I used to pray. I paid for half without complaint. Wrote the checks quietly. Nelson thanked me once, briefly, then asked if we could update the branding for the wedding favors. Maybe just use the Zaha Enterprises logo without spelling out the name so much. I nodded, smiled, said nothing. The night before the wedding, he came to my house alone. We sat on the back porch overlooking the garden Grace planted. Fireflies blinked in the dark. "Dad," he said, voice low, "tomorrow. Cristobal's family thinks it might be better if, after the ceremony, I take her name. Harper. Legally. Clean break from complications." I looked at the stars. Complications, the pronunciation, the questions. It's held me back in some circles. You understand, right? Business is perception. I understood more than he knew. Every contract I'd won despite the name. Every boardroom where I'd had to spell it twice. Every time someone assumed I was the laborer, not the owner. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "It's your wedding, son. Your life. Do what feels right." He exhaled, relieved. Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd get it. He left. I sat there until dawn, replaying every sacrifice. The nights I slept in the truck on job sites so he could have private school. The medical bills I paid when he broke his arm skiing, using money I'd saved for my retirement. The way I'd quietly transferred shares into a trust for him at 25, vesting on his 35th birthday, so he'd never struggle. And now the name that carried us here embarrassed him that I didn't cry. I planned. The morning of the wedding, I met the AV coordinator in the ballroom's control room. I handed him a USB drive. Play this after the toasts. When my son speaks. Full screen. No announcement, just roll it. He looked curious. I smiled. It's a surprise for the family. The ballroom at the Peninsula Chicago shimmered like a dream no one had asked me to pay for. Crystal chandeliers caught every flicker of candlelight and threw it back across white tablecloths, gold-rimmed china, and the faces of 300 people who mostly knew Christabel's family name better than mine. Roses in soft blush and ivory spilled from tall centerpieces. A string quartet had just finished Pachelbel's canon for the third time that evening. The air smelled of champagne, expensive perfume, and the faint metallic tang of anticipation that I sat at the head table between two of Christabel's uncles. One a venture capitalist who kept checking his watch, the other a retired judge who spoke in measured sentences about legacy. Across from me, Nelson looked every inch the groom. Charcoal tuxedo tailored in Milan, hair swept back, smile practiced and perfect. Christabel glowed beside him in ivory lace, her hand resting lightly on his forearm as though anchoring him to her world. The toasts had been elegant. Christabel's father spoke first, warm, paternal, full of golf course anecdotes and gentle ribbing about how Nelson had finally found someone who could keep up with him. Laughter rippled through the room. Then Christabel's maid of honor, tears already shining, read a poem about soulmates and forever. More applause. More clinking glasses. When it was Nelson's turn to speak, he stood slowly, glass in hand, and the room quieted with the kind of hush reserved for royalty or confessions. He looked at Christabel first, soft, adoring, then turned to face the sea of faces. His eyes found mine for half a second. I nodded once, encouraging, the way I always had. Thank you all for being here, he began, voice steady, carrying easily over the tables. Today has been perfect. Christabel, you make every day feel like the best version of my life. Applause again, warm and immediate. He waited for it to fade. And Dad, he turned fully toward me now. The spotlight caught the crisp line of his jaw. I want to say something publicly, because you deserve to hear it. My heart gave one hard, warning thud. I've carried your name my whole life. Zaha. He said it slowly, letting each syllable land like a stone in still water. It's a beautiful name in its way. It means something powerful where you come from. But here, in boardrooms, at charity events, on legal documents, it's always been a question mark. People pause. They ask me to spell it. They assume things before I even open my mouth. A few soft laughs, nervous, uncertain. Christabel's mother shifted in her seat. Nelson kept going. I've loved you. I've respected everything you built. But I've also hated how that name has followed me like a shadow I didn't choose. So tonight, in front of everyone who matters to Christabel and me, I want to be honest. Your last name embarrasses me, Dad. It always has. And after tonight, I'm changing it. Legally. I'll be Nelson Harper from now on. The room went still, not silent. Silent would have been kinder. This was a held breath, a collective freeze where even the string quartet's fingers hovered above the strings that I felt every eye swing toward me. Heat rose under my collar, but not from shame. From something older, deeper. Recognition. Nelson raised his glass higher. To new beginnings, he said. To leaving what doesn't serve us anymore. To family, the one we choose. A smattering of uncertain claps started near the back. Christabel looked at me with wide, worried eyes, mouthing, I'm sorry, across the table. Her father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable that I didn't move at first. Then I smiled. Not a tight, polite curve of the lips. A real one, slow, calm, almost gentle. I lifted my own glass in return, just enough for him to see. Thank you, son, I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. It carried. For your honesty. I set the glass down. Then I turned slightly toward the AV booth at the far wall and gave the smallest nod, the one I'd rehearsed that morning with the coordinator. The lights dimmed, a soft collective murmur rose as the giant screen behind the sweetheart table flickered to life. No title card. No introduction. Just grainy home video footage from 1998 that the camera wobbled as a younger me, 30-something, hair still dark, sleeves rolled to the elbows, walked across a muddy construction site on the south side. Snow flurried in the background. Chicago winter at its cruelest. I was carrying a small boy on my shoulders. The boy, maybe 6 years old, wore an oversized hard hat that kept slipping over his eyes. Hold on tight, Nelson, my voice said on the screen, laughing. We're going up to see the city from the top. The camera, Grace's old camcorder, followed us as I climbed the temporary stairs to the half-finished roof of what would become the first Zaha Enterprises high-rise. Wind whipped around us. The boy squealed with delight and fear. Look, Daddy. The whole world. I pointed toward the distant loop skyline. Lights just starting to sparkle against the gray dusk. That's ours, son. Not yet. But one day, everything you see, we're going to build it. And we're going to do it with our name on it. Zaha. You hear me? Zaha means we don't hide. We shine. The boy on my shoulders threw his arms wide like he could hug the whole city. Zaha. He shouted, voice high and proud. Zaha. Zaha. The footage cut. New scene. Our old kitchen in Englewood, 2003. Grace still alive. Hair wrapped in a colorful scarf, stirring something on the stove. Nelson, now 11, sat at the table doing homework. I walked in, exhausted, coveralls streaked with concrete dust. Daddy's home. Grace called. Nelson looked up, eyes bright. Did you win the bid? I grinned, dropped my lunchbox on the counter. We did. The Lakeview project. Biggest one yet. He jumped up, ran over, hugged me around the waist. That means more money for college, right? I laughed, ruffled his hair. That means more money for everything. But most important, I knelt so we were eye to eye. It means more people will know the name Zaha. They'll see what we can do. Black man from Nigeria building half of Chicago. They'll remember. Nelson nodded solemnly. I want people to remember. Grace came over, kissed the top of his head. They will, baby. Because your daddy never stops. Another cut. The recession hit like a sledgehammer. The screen showed me in the office at 2 a.m., surrounded by red ink financials. Nelson, 16 now, sat across from me, still in his high school Letterman jacket. Dad, are we going to lose the house? I looked at him for a long moment. Then I reached into the drawer, pulled out a thick envelope. No, we're not. I slid it across the desk. Inside, the deed to our Hyde Park home, fully paid off. I'd liquidated my personal savings, cashed out retirement accounts, sold the lake cabin up in Wisconsin. Everything except the company itself. I promised your mother before she passed, I said quietly on screen. No matter what, you'd never lose your home. And you'd never lose your future. Nelson stared at the papers. Tears welled. But college? Your retirement. I shrugged. College is already in a trust. Your future is safe. Mine. I smiled tiredly. I'll build again. Names like ours don't quit. The boy on screen hugged me so hard the chair creaked. Cut to 2015. Nelson's graduation from Northwestern. I sat in the stands alone. Grace's seat empty beside me, watching him cross the stage. When his name was called, Nelson Zaha, the small section of my foreman and cousins erupted in cheers louder than anyone else's. He glanced up, found me, and gave the smallest, proudest nod. The footage jumped forward again. Last year. My 67th birthday. Nelson had come over, rare these days. We sat on the porch, same one where he'd asked me about changing his name. He handed me a small box. Inside, a gold watch. Engraved on the back, to Dad, for everything the name built. Nelson I'd worn it tonight. The screen went dark. Silence held the ballroom for 3 full heartbeats. Then a single sob. Christabel's mother broke it. Nelson stood frozen, glass still raised, face drained of color. His hand trembled. Champagne sloshed over the rim. I rose slowly. Every eye followed me. I walked around the table, past Christabel's wide-eyed stare, past her father's stunned expression, and stopped in front of my son. He looked smaller than he had in years. I reached out, took the glass from his shaking fingers, set it down. Then I pulled him into my arms, not gently, firmly, the way I used to when he was 6 and the world felt too big. He didn't hug back at first. Then his shoulders began to shake. A choked sound escaped him. Half sob, half gasp. The room remained hushed. But now it was different. Not frozen. Listening. I spoke low, just for him. You want to change your name, son? That's your right. Always has been. He pulled back enough to look at me. Tears streaked his face. But the trust, the shares, the company. I nodded once. Vest at 35. Only if you carry the name. That was the condition I set when I created it. Quietly, through the lawyers. I never told you because I never thought I'd have to. His mouth opened. Closed. The house in Hyde Park. I continued softly. The Lake Michigan condo. The shares that would make you majority owner one day. They're tied to Zaha. Because that name carried us through every storm. I wasn't trying to trap you. I was trying to protect what we built. Together. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Daddy. The word slipped out, small, childlike. The same way he'd said it on that windy rooftop 30 years earlier. I cupped the back of his head the way I used to. I'm not angry, Nelson. I'm heartbroken. But I'm still here. Christabel stood now, tears streaming, clutching her bouquet like a lifeline. She looked between us, voice trembling. Nelson, I didn't know. None of us knew. He turned to her, then back to me. I thought you'd understand. I thought it was just a name. It was never just a name, I said. It was everything I had to give you when I had nothing else. The string quartet began to play again, soft, tentative. Someone dimmed the screen. But the moment lingered, heavy and alive. Nelson's knees buckled slightly. I steadied him. I'm sorry, he whispered. God, Dad. I'm so sorry. I smiled again, smaller this time, but real. I know. If this moment of raw truth and a father's quiet strength touched you, please leave a comment below with the word forgive if you believe second chances are worth fighting for, or share your own story of a family rift that still hurts. Your words mean more than you know. The string quartet had stopped playing altogether. In the sudden quiet, the only sounds were soft sniffles from a few tables, the distant clink of a dropped fork, and the ragged breathing of my son still pressed against my chest. I held him a moment longer, long enough for the tremor in his shoulders to slow, then gently eased him back so I could see his face. His eyes were red-rimmed, pupils wide with something between shock and shame. Christabel stood frozen a few feet away, mascara streaking down her cheeks like black rain. Her bouquet trembled in her grip. I looked around the ballroom. 300 faces stared back, some stunned, some tearful, a few already reaching for phones to record what they probably thought was the scandal of the season. Christabel's father, Richard Harper, rose slowly from his chair. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who commanded rooms without raising his voice. He cleared his throat. Mr. Zaha, he began, formal as ever. Perhaps we should take this conversation somewhere more private. I met his gaze evenly. No, Richard. This began in public. It ends in public. Everyone here is family now, or soon will be. He hesitated, then nodded once. The judge uncle beside him murmured something to his wife. Christabel's mother dabbed at her eyes with a silk napkin. Nelson finally found his voice. Hoarse, cracked. Dad, can we just talk? Please. I placed a hand on his arm. We will. But first, let everyone breathe. I turned to the AV coordinator still hovering near the booth and made a small cutting motion across my throat. The screen stayed dark. The lights came back up slowly, warm again, but the air felt heavier now, thick with unspoken questions. Christabel stepped forward, reaching for Nelson's hand. He took it automatically, but his eyes never left mine. I need air, he whispered. She nodded. Let's go to the terrace. The three of us, father, son, soon-to-be daughter-in-law, walked through the parting crowd. Whispers followed like wind through dry leaves. I kept my shoulders straight, chin level. I'd walked through worse judgment on job sites when men twice my size questioned whether the African could read a blueprint. The terrace overlooked Michigan Avenue 30 floors below. Late summer night air carried the faint scent of the lake and car exhaust. City lights glittered like scattered diamonds. A few smokers lingered at the far end. They saw us and discreetly moved inside. That we stopped near the railing. Nelson leaned against it, elbows on the stone, head bowed. Christabel stood close, rubbing slow circles on his back. I waited. Finally he spoke without looking up. How long have you had that video ready? Since the day you told me you wanted to change your name, I answered quietly. I didn't know if I'd ever use it. But I knew if the moment came. I wanted you to see what the name actually cost. Not just money. Time. Sleep. Your mother's last years when I was chasing contracts instead of being home. Every time I smiled through a racial slur on a site, so we could keep the payroll going. He flinched that Christabel's voice was small. We never knew any of that. Nelson always said you were successful, that the company was big, but he never talked about the struggle. Because I didn't want pity, Nelson muttered. I wanted to be seen as normal, not the kid whose dad had an accent and a funny last name. I exhaled slowly. Normal is overrated, son. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. Easy for you to say. You built the empire. I just inherited the baggage. The words landed like a slap, but I didn't react. I'd heard worse from foremen, from bankers, from people who thought money erased memory. Tell me, I said instead, what exactly embarrasses you? The pronunciation? Or the fact that people still look at me and see the laborer first? He turned then, eyes flashing. Both. All of it. Do you know how many times I've had to explain at cocktail parties that my father isn't the janitor? That he owns the building we're standing in? They smile politely, then whisper later. Oh, the diversity hire. The affirmative action story. I'm tired of being the exception instead of the rule. Christabel squeezed his hand. Nelson? No, he cut in. Let me finish. Dad, you made it. Congratulations. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life proving I belong in rooms you already fought your way into. Harper is clean. Simple. No backstory required. I nodded slowly. And the trust? The shares? The house you grew up in? You're willing to walk away from all of it. He swallowed. If that's the price, yes. Silence stretched between us. Christabel looked at me, pleading. Mr. Zaha, is there no way? There is always a way, I said. But it requires honesty. From all of us. I turned to my son. Do you remember the night your mother died? He stiffened. You were 12? I continued. She called me into the hospital room at 3 in the morning. I thought it was the end. It was. She held my hand. Weak, but still strong enough to make me promise 2 things. 1, that I'd never let you forget where we came from. 2, that I'd make sure you never had to fight the battles I fought. His jaw worked. Tears welled again. I kept the second promise, I said. The trust, the education, the safety net, all of it. But the first one, I failed. Because somewhere along the way, you started believing our story was something to be ashamed of. He shook his head violently. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked gently. You said the name embarrasses you. That means the man who carried it embarrasses you too. No, his voice broke. I love you, Dad. I can't carry it anymore. Christabel stepped between us, hands raised like a referee. Stop. Both of you. This isn't helping. She turned to Nelson first. You're hurting him. More than you realize. Then to me. And you're hurting him by making this feel like an ultimatum. He's scared, Mr. Zaha. Scared of failing you. Scared of not being enough. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't the polished Winnetka princess I'd sometimes resented in my quieter moments. She was a woman watching her wedding night fracture, and still trying to hold the pieces together. You're right, I admitted. I'm sorry. Nelson stared at me like I'd spoken another language. I continued. I've spent years protecting you from pain. Maybe too many. You never saw the nights I cried after losing a bid because someone said they didn't want that kind running the job. You never saw your mother comforting me when clients assumed I was the subcontractor instead of the owner. I hid it so you could dream bigger. He wiped his face roughly. I didn't ask you to hide it. But I did. And now you're ashamed of the very thing I protected you from feeling. Another long silence. Christabel spoke softly. What if we delay the legal name change? Just for a while. Give everyone time to process. Nelson looked at her. You be okay with that? Your parents, my parents will survive, she said firmly. This is our marriage, not theirs. He exhaled shakily. Dad, I don't want to lose you. Or the company. Or us. But I don't know how to carry the name without feeling like I'm wearing someone else's skin. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gold watch he'd given me last year. The engraving caught the terrace light that I held it out to him. Read it again. He took it, fingers unsteady. To Dad, for everything the name built. I waited until he looked up. The name didn't build anything. I did. Your grandfather did before me. Your mother did by believing in us when no one else did. The name is just the flag we flew while we fought. His throat worked. I don't know if I'm strong enough to fly it. You don't have to be, I said. Not yet. But you have to decide if you're willing to try. Christabel touched his cheek. We can try together. All 3 of us. He closed his eyes. I need time. You have it, I told him. My throat tightened so hard I couldn't speak at first. Christabel watched me, tears slipping silently down her face. When I finally looked up, Nelson was staring at the table, knuckles white around his coffee cup. I folded the paper again, placed it in my breast pocket, over my heart. Then I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Son, I said, and the word came out rough, thick with everything I'd held back for years. You didn't have to write that. I did, he whispered. I needed to see it in my own handwriting, so I couldn't pretend later that I didn't mean it. I squeezed his hand. I forgive you. The words hung there, simple, final, enormous. Nelson's shoulders dropped like a weight had lifted. He let out a long, shuddering breath. But, I continued, forgiveness isn't the end. It's the beginning. You keep the name. You keep the trust. You keep the company one day. And you keep the promise your mother and I made, that you would never forget where you came from. He nodded. I won't. Christabel spoke then, voice soft but steady. I want to change something too. We both looked at her. I've spent my whole life trying to fit into a version of perfect that my family expected. Clean name. Clean story. No rough edges. But last night I saw what real strength looks like. She turned to me. It looks like you, Mr. Zaha. Quiet. Unbreakable. Loving even when it costs everything. She turned to Nelson. And it looks like you deciding, not to run, but to stay. To fight for something bigger than comfort. Nelson lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. So here's my promise, she said. I'm keeping Harper as my professional name, because that's how my clients know me. But legally, on our marriage certificate, on our future children's birth certificates, on every document that matters most, I want to be Christabel Zaha Harper. Hyphenated. Both names. Both stories. Nelson stared at her. You do that. For us, she said. For the family we're building. One that doesn't erase, it adds. I felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom behind my ribs. Not just relief. Pride. In both of them. I reached for Christabel's other hand. Welcome to the name, daughter. She laughed through tears. Thank you, Dad. The word landed soft and perfect that we sat there another hour. Talking. Really talking. About the future. About how Nelson would start shadowing me more at the company. Not as heir apparent, but as student. About how Christabel wanted to help expand the Grace Zaha Memorial Fund. Maybe add a scholarship for first-generation college students with unusual last names. About how we'd host Thanksgiving at my house this year. No fancy Gold Coast penthouse. Just the old dining room with mismatched chairs and Grace's china. When the cafe started filling with the lunch crowd, we finally stood. Outside on 53rd Street, the sun had broken through the clouds. Warm light slanted across the sidewalk. Nelson stopped me before we parted. One more thing. He said that he pulled out his phone, opened the camera app, and handed it to Christabel. Take a picture. Just us. Father and son. I stood beside him. He put his arm around my shoulders, the way I used to put mine around his when he was small. Christabel framed the shot. Smile. She said that we did. Not forced. Real. Tired, bruised, but real. She snapped it. Then she showed us the screen. Two men. Different generations, same eyes, same stubborn jaw, standing shoulder to shoulder on a Chicago sidewalk. Behind us, the university spires rose like quiet witnesses. Nelson looked at the photo for a long time. That's the new lock screen, he said. I nodded. Good. We hugged again, longer this time. Christabel joined. A small family knot right there on the sidewalk. When we separated, Nelson met my eyes. I'm proud to be a Zaha, he said. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it out loud. I cupped his face the way I had when he was 6. Better late than never, son. We walked to our cars. His a sleek black Tesla Christabel's parents had gifted, mine the same old silver Lexus I'd driven for 12 years. Before I got in, Nelson called after me. Dad? I turned. Next Saturday, can we go to Mom's grave together? Bring flowers. Talk. Like we used to. My chest ached in the best way. I'd like that very much. He smiled, small, tentative, but his own. See you then. I watched them drive away, hand in hand. Then I got in my car, started the engine, and sat there a moment with the photo he'd sent to my phone. I set it as my wallpaper too. The name Zaha glowed back at me from the screen. Imperfect, mispronounced by half the world, but mine. Ours. And for the first time in years, it felt like radiance again. If this turning point, When forgiveness became choice, when pride gave way to honor, when a family chose each other over comfort. Touched something deep inside you. Please comment below with Zaha if you believe names can carry love across generations, or share the moment someone in your life chose to stay instead of walk away. Your stories are the heartbeat of these tales. The weeks that followed the wedding felt like the slow turning of a heavy door, creaking at first, then opening wider with each careful push. Saturday arrived crisp and golden, the kind of early fall Chicago morning where the lake wind carries just enough bite to remind you winter is coming, but the sun still insists on staying. I picked Nelson and Christabel up at their new apartment in Streeterville, a sleek high-rise Christabel's parents had helped them buy as a welcome to married life gift. Nelson had insisted on paying half from his savings. I'd smiled when he told me. Small steps toward independence, but still tethered to the lessons we were relearning together. That we drove south in my old Lexus, the three of us quiet at first. Nelson sat in the front passenger seat, Christabel in the back, holding a simple bouquet of white lilies and pale blue hydrangeas, Grace's favorites. The radio played low jazz from WDCB, the public station I'd listened to since the 1980s. No one changed the station. Mount Hope Cemetery sits on a gentle rise near the Dan Ryan Expressway. The headstones are old and weathered, many with names from waves of immigrants: Irish, Polish, Italian, and later, African. Grace's plot is in a quieter section, under a young maple tree we planted the year after she passed. The leaves were just beginning to turn red at the edges that we parked and walked the short path in silence. Leaves crunched underfoot. A groundskeeper nodded respectfully as we passed. I'd tipped him generously over the years to keep the grave tidy. When we reached the stone, Nelson stopped a few feet away. The marker was simple gray granite. Grace Zaha. Beloved wife, mother light. 1960 to 2003. Her radiance never fades below it. In smaller script, I'd added years later. And they shall shine as the brightness of the firmament. From Daniel 12 verse 3, the verse she loved most. Nelson knelt first. He placed the bouquet carefully against the base, fingers lingering on the stone as though he could still feel her warmth through it. "Hi, Mom," he whispered. His voice cracked on the second word. "I'm sorry I stayed away so long." Christabel knelt beside him, slipping her hand into his. I stood behind them, hands clasped in front, letting them have the moment. "I got married," Nelson continued, voice steadier now. "Her name is Christabel. She's incredible. You would have loved her. She makes me laugh the way you used to make Dad laugh when he came home exhausted." He laughed softly, a small, surprised sound. "I messed up, Mom. Badly. At the wedding. I said things about Dad's name, our name, that I didn't even fully understand until afterward. I hurt him. I hurt you too, I think. Because you love that name. You chose it every day, even when people mispronounced it or looked down on it." He swallowed hard. "But I'm keeping it now. Not because of the money or the company, though I won't lie, that scared me straight for a minute, but because it's part of you, part of us. I want our children to know they come from someone who carried light, even when the world tried to put it out." Christabel rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm taking the name too," she said softly to the stone. "Not replacing Harper, but adding Zaha. Christabel Zaha Harper. So our kids will have both worlds. The one I grew up in, and the one you and Mr. Zaha built from courage." I felt my eyes burn. I blinked it back. Nelson looked up at me then. "Dad, come here." I stepped forward and knelt between them. The grass was cool through my trousers. Nelson reached out and placed my hand on the stone, covering it with his own. "I forgive myself," he said quietly, "because I know you and Mom would want that. But more than that, I want to make you proud, not of what I inherit, but of what I become." I turned my hand so our palms met over Grace's name. "You already do," I told him. "Every time you choose love over fear. That's the real inheritance." We stayed like that a long time, 3 hands on gray stone, sun warming our backs, city traffic a distant hum. When we finally stood, Nelson brushed dirt from his knees. "I want to come here more," he said. "Once a month, maybe. Bring the kids when they come. Tell them stories." I smiled. "I'd like that." Christabel linked her arm through mine as we walked back to the car. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Better than okay," I answered. "I feel whole again." In the months that followed, life settled into a new rhythm, one that felt both familiar and freshly painted. Nelson started coming to the Zaha Enterprises office 3 days a week. Not in a corner suite with a view, but in the open-plan bullpen with the project managers and estimators. He learned the software, shadowed site visits, sat in on subcontractor negotiations. He asked questions, good ones. He listened more than he spoke. The foremen, men who'd known him since he was a boy in a hard hat, teased him mercilessly. Little Zaha finally, getting his hands dirty, they'd call that he took it with a grin. Better late than never. Cristobal threw herself into the Grace Zaha Memorial Fund. She redesigned the website, launched a social media campaign, secured corporate sponsors. Applications for scholarships tripled in the first quarter. One recipient, a young woman from Englewood whose last name was constantly mispronounced, wrote a thank you letter that made us all cry. I used to wish I could change my name so people would stop asking questions. Now I want to make them remember it. At home, Nelson and Cristobal began renovations on a 3-bedroom in Hyde Park, not far from my house. Old hardwood floors, big windows, a backyard big enough for a swing set someday. They invited me over every Sunday for dinner. Sometimes we cooked Nigerian jollof rice with Grace's recipe. Sometimes Cristobal made her family's pot roast. We laughed. We argued about politics and sports. We prayed together before eating, short, simple thanks that always included Grace. Thanksgiving that year was at my house. The dining room table stretched with every leaf inserted. Mismatched chairs. Grace's china. Nelson's cousins from Atlanta flew in. Cristobal's parents drove down from Winnetka, tentative at first, then warming as the evening went on. Richard Harper even asked me about early Zaha Enterprises projects. I told stories. He listened. After dessert, sweet potato pie and Cristobal's apple tart, we gathered in the living room. Nelson stood. I have something, he said. He pulled a small framed photo from a bag. The one Cristobal had taken on 53rd Street the morning after the wedding. Father and son, shoulder to shoulder, smiling against the city backdrop. He set it on the mantel beside the older photo of Grace holding baby Nelson. Now it's complete, he said. Cristobal slipped her arm around his waist. Richard raised his glass of sparkling cider. To the Zahas, he said. All of them. Everyone echoed it. To the Zahas. Later, when the house quieted and guests had gone, Nelson and Cristobal stayed to help clean I in the kitchen. Nelson dried dishes while I washed. Dad, he said after a while. I filed the papers last week. I paused, sponge in hand. Which papers? He smiled. Small, certain. Name change denial. I'm staying Nelson Zaha. Legally. Permanently. I set the sponge down. And Cristobal? She filed too. Cristobal Zaha Harper. The hyphen stays. Best of both worlds. I pulled him into a hug, wet hands and all. He laughed against my shoulder. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. Cristobal joined from the doorway, eyes shining. Group hug? She asked. We opened our arms. She stepped in. The three of us stood there in the warm kitchen light. Dishes forgotten. Time unimportant. Months turned to a year. The company thrived. Nelson took over more responsibility. Not because I was stepping back, but because he was stepping up. We argued over bids, laughed over site mishaps, celebrated when a project finished ahead of schedule. Cristobal became pregnant in the spring. A boy. They named him Adebayo Grace Zaha Harper, after my mother and his grandmother. Bayo for short. When he was born, I held him first after the nurses. Tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb. Dark eyes already curious. Welcome to the family, little one. I whispered. Your name means radiance. Wear it like the gift it is. Nelson watched from the bedside, tears streaming unashamed. Cristobal reached for my hand. Thank you, she said. For everything. I kissed her forehead. Thank you for choosing us. Years later, though it felt like no time at all, Bayo turned 5. We took him to the rooftop of the first Zaha high-rise, the one Nelson and I had climbed together when he was 6. The city spread below us, changed yet familiar. Bayo threw his arms wide, hard hat slipping over his eyes. Zaha, he shouted, voice high and proud. Zaha, Zaha. Nelson laughed, lifted him onto his shoulders that I stood beside them, wind in my hair, heart so full it hurt in the best way. The name echoed across the skyline. Imperfect, hard-won, radiant, and in that moment, I knew we had kept every promise. To Grace. To each other. To To the boy who once said the name embarrassed him, and then spent a lifetime proving it was worth every syllable. If this final chapter of healed wounds, new life, enduring love, and a name reclaimed with joy moved you to tears or hope, please comment below with radiance if you believe no family story is ever truly finished, or share the name in your life that carries the most love, sacrifice, or second chances. Your words keep these journeys alive long after the screen fades. Thank you for staying with Mr. Zaha's story through every tear and every turn. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.